It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorne. Next up, Javaka Steptoe. He's an artist and a children's book author. His latest book is an illustrated biography of a young Jean-Michel Basquiat. It's called Radiant Child. It's a beautiful, compassionate story about one of the greatest artists of our time. The book just won the 2017 Caldecott Medal, basically the Pulitzer of the children's book world. For Javaka, kids' books run in the family. His father was John Steptoe, who won 2 Caldecotts himself. Javaka was even a character in one of his dad's books. Radiant Child has very quickly become a favorite with my kids. I'm thrilled to have Javaka Steptoe joining me now. Javaka, welcome to Bullseye.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. So I wonder what appealed to you so strongly about Jean-Michel Basquiat, as not just as an artist, but also as a subject that you would want to spend 5 years with him making this book.
He just was a part of my life on a lot of different levels. In the beginning, when I was, becoming an artist as opposed to someone who, would just sit and draw comics, he was a part of my development, and the imagery that he would use in his paintings would be the same, or would come from the same places that my imagery would come from. As artists, I think we spend a lot of time in our heads, and we think about our past and the things that have happened to us as we have lived our lives. And the things that we find curious or the things that we find painful, those are the things that we focus on in our artwork. And so he came from a place where I came from, So a lot of the imagery and a lot of the things that he was talking about were things that were part of my life experience, and not just, this is in a museum, let me see what it's about. There's also the cultural experience of being Black in America, and Black in America at different points of time is different, and it's always evolving and changing. And so to see him at that particular time on the cover of the New York Times art section, that's really exciting. Someone who is not that far from my age, who is speaking about similar things and having similar thoughts as me, and, achieving, that's really great to see.
There's something about his work that is so vivid and connects so directly. And that's not true for, a lot of even acclaimed fine artists, especially, if you don't have a ton of cultural context around the work or whatever, right? That with Basquiat's work, you look at it and you feel it. And that seems very special to me, that the vividness of the feeling that you get from looking at his pictures.
Right. I think he definitely speaks to that emotional part of us. And, you feel it in the way that he applies his medium, whether it's the paint or the oil pastel pencils. Like you feel joy, you feel anger, you feel sadness, you feel all of these different emotions. But I think the thing that really touches people is that he speaks about struggle. And struggle is something that we all go through. We all have these big juggernauts that seem unconquerable. And he speaks about that. He speaks about industry. He's rooting for the average person, the average Joe. He's like the underdog, fighting for everyone. And through his artwork, we're all rooting for him. And I think that's one of the things that touches everyone, that everyone can understand.
My mom sent me the announcement that your book had won the Caldecott.
Nice.
And she said, this has to be him, right? And she was referring to a book that your father wrote. Your father was also an acclaimed children's book writer and illustrator.
Yes.
That you were a character in. called Special Best Words.
Yes.
That was maybe my favorite book as a child.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, very sincerely. And I mean, like, am I going to say definitely more than In the Night Kitchen? No, I can't make that promise. But
Okay.
we'll call it definitely top 3, right?
Okay.
And Special Best Words is a story about you and your sister. And I had no idea until my mom sent me this email that you and your sister were real people. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But it's a story about you and your sister and your dad or a dad taking care of you. And it's a real plain story. And I've been thinking as I read that book with my own kids who are the right age to read that book, what it was about it that connected so deeply with me when I was a kid. And I think that it is rare to read a story about a single parent,
Right.
where single parenthood is kind of honored but not foregrounded.
Right.
And it's also a story where the setting and context are identifiably urban and, you know, lower middle class in a way that, again, is not about overcoming poverty or something like that,
Right.
but simply about the reality of just day-to-day life. And, you know, those were circumstances in my own life at the time when I was that age. And I think that there weren't other stories like that.
Right.
And I'm white, and that lack of representation that I felt has to be dramatically different for kids who aren't white, for whom 85% of the lead characters in stories or 90% of the lead characters in stories that they may read aren't the same color as them.
Right.
I wonder if you were thinking about representation when you made this book, and especially in the way that, you know, in some ways you are representing Basquiat's life, but also representing your own life as a young artist.
One of the things my father would tell me about his reason for creating children's books is because it's important for you to see yourself in the books that you read, in the TV shows that you watch, to see yourself in all its diversity. I definitely think about representation when 3 to 4% of children's books that are published every year have non-white characters as their, you know, main protagonists. That has to be something that I think about. And I think a lot about it. I try to choose characters that are interesting, that are not saying the same story over and over again. You know, like, I'm going to make a new basketball book. I'm going to make a new slavery book or a new civil rights struggle book that tells the same story in the same way.
It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorne. I'm talking with Javaka Steptoe, author of the Caldecott-winning children's book, Radiant Child, the story of young artist Jean-Michel Basquiat. You're a little bit younger than Basquiat was when he was alive.
Mm-hmm.
But like, he's close enough to you in age that he must have felt touchable. You know what I mean? Like he must have felt relevant in the way that a 12-year-old girl feels like she could date the new kids on the block even though they're all 26. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I wonder what he meant to you personally as a kid.
It was like a family member making it because he was me. He opened up the possibilities of what I could achieve as a fine artist, as someone who wants to talk from a particular perspective.
Both of your parents were artists.
Yes.
What did you think about art as a life and as a job when you were old enough to think about art as a life and as a job?
I think I really grew up spoiled because My parents didn't have traditional jobs, and they were making a living, and I would go to friends' houses when I was younger, and they would all ask me, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" And I would say, "An artist." And then they would say to me, "How are you going to make a living?" And I really thought that was a really strange question, because my parents were feeding me and buying me clothes, and we didn't have the fabulous life of a billionaire or a millionaire, but we were making a living. We were getting all of the different things that we needed. We had an understanding of culture. We were being educated. We ate every day. I didn't have that struggle.
Were there times in your life where you would have preferred not to have been introduced so often as your parents' child, and especially your father's child?
Yes. And I think that was more so when I was young. I feel like in terms of my artistry, I feel like I'm myself. Though people ask me, are you the son of John Steptoe? I think that what I'm doing is strong enough to stand on its own. There were definitely times, and I would say more times, where there was a lot of pride and a lot of wisdom and a lot of good difference. Like I felt like I was being fed in a way that other people weren't fed, and it allowed me to see the world in a different way.
How old were you when your father died?
I was 17.
That's a time when a lot of kids, and especially boys, are in conflict with their dads.
Right.
I mean, I know I was.
Yeah.
I love you, Dad. What were the circumstances?
He had passed away from AIDS. And the year before he passed away, we spent a lot of time talking with each other and sharing things about his life with me, and just being like a really loving person. It's hard seeing a parent, a role model, becoming weak and not having the strength and tenacity, and knowing that, that they're going to pass away.
It's kind of a particularly scary thing to watch as well.
Yeah.
And I remember I had family friends who passed away from AIDS around the time that your father did. And that weakening is really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, you notice just small things about their appearance and their mannerisms, and there's basically nothing you could do.
How did it change the way that you thought about your father when he passed away and when he wasn't there anymore?
I don't know if it changed the way I thought about him, but I know that I had a lot to think about. So 17 is not necessarily the age that it's about fighting with your father, but it's more like at 17, you're thinking about becoming a man. And so a lot of times what happens is we fight with our father because, we're a man, so we don't have to listen to what they're saying anymore. And, we have dominion over our life now. Because I didn't have the opportunity to express manhood in that way, I thought a lot about what it meant to be a man, and what are the responsibilities and roles of manhood. How can I become as great as my father? I just think about how old he was when he passed away, and how old he was, how mature he was, how responsible he was. And then I compare it to like how responsible I am right now and how mature I am right now. And I mean, of course, this is all, you know, through the lens of a son watching like the greatest person in the world. But I know that I don't necessarily want to say sacrifice, but I know that he did a lot. There was a great effort put into me and my sister growing up and becoming stable, well-adjusted individuals.
Part of your book is about Jean-Michel Basquiat's mother's mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
That he, you know, he sort of lost her when he was a kid.
Yeah.
You had similar experiences with your mother when you were a young man.
Yes.
What was it about that experience that you wanted to represent for kids?
I don't think it's so much that I wanted to represent. Maybe I just wanted to just open a space to allow them to normalize their experience, because mental illness is not something that we necessarily talk about regularly. And I also think that maybe I just wanted to say that if it's a situation where you knew a person and they changed, maybe there's something that you could hold on to in that relationship, you know? Like, it doesn't have to be something that you just throw away.
What are the things that you hold on to about your mom?
I guess my mom she was like a rock. No matter what, she made sure that we had food and we had a place to stay, and just not like the bare basics, but we were always in some sort of art program, and whether it was the Museum of Natural History, Saturday children's program, she really thought about us.
I mean, one of the things that you do as a children's writer is take your book to kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it has a big effect on kids, because I drove my daughter home from school yesterday. She's 5 in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
And an author who had came to her class had blown her mind. Like, it was all she could talk about.
Right.
Usually she doesn't have that much to say about school, right? And I wonder what in this book you've found has connected and opened the hearts of the kids that you interact with directly.
I guess you could say it's like a buffet. You know, you take what you want from it and you connect with it wherever your experiences allow you to connect with it. I heard one story. Someone asked for a copy of Radiant Child because the picture on the cover looked like them. And then, you know, you have another connection because I'm Haitian or I'm Puerto Rican. You have another connection because I'm an artist. You have another connection because someone that I know, or maybe I am dealing with mental illness. Or maybe just like Basquiat, you know? I guess any way you make a connection is great for me.
Well, Javaka, thank you so much for coming on the show and being so open-hearted about answering my questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here, Jesse.
Javaka Steptoe's book just won the Caldecott Medal. It's called Radiant Child, the story of young artist Jean-Michel Basquiat.